over to Jane, and I probably said too much about it on the French one. And so we did this last Saturday for French. I think we've got a lot of people on the call again that did the French side of the CWEB, but we're doing Italy today. I will tell you how this is going to work. If you press the chat button usually on the bottom of your screen, if you move your cursor, if you're not seeing it, if you move your cursor, it's going to come up on your screen. And if you click chat, it's going to put a white band to one side of your screen, and then you'll be able to type questions. So we'll take questions throughout, but given the size of the group, I think it's best that we type in our questions. And Anais and I will monitor those questions and ask them of the speakers as we go and as time permits. We plan to have this to be an hour 20, something like that. Very informal, just want you to be able to meet and chat with the people that bring us our wines, that we thank very much for doing the work that goes into one of these. I can tell you that when we put the word out, we got 203 submissions for CWEB20, and Jane tasted well over 100 of them and chose the top 61 to be in CWEB20, and those are the ones that you're getting to choose from. And take up on CWEB20 has been excellent. Sales have been great, and I still haven't even put in my order yet, and I've kind of got mine building. I'm currently, it's not the Barolo that's in the CWEB, but it is one of Michael's Barolos from Cabuto, and I'm enjoying it very much here as we go. And it's one of these new glasses that are now on in the gift shop on the Opimian website. This is called Wine Wings from Riedel, and this is for the heavy reds, and it actually makes the wine. We actually did a Riedel tasting showing you why the wines taste better in these varietal specific glasses, and it really works. I was absolutely amazed, so it was great. So without further ado, I will introduce the woman who needs no introduction, and that is Jane Masters, our Master of Wine. Over to you, Jane.
Great, thanks, Michael, and welcome to everybody. It's great to be here this evening. I don't want to sort of repeat too much about what I said last week, but for those people that weren't with us on the session last Saturday, I wanted to just give you a little bit of a background as to how we came up with this web offering. At the time of planning this, myself, Michael, Greg, and our colleague with whom I work very closely, Anna, in the office, were discussing all the things that were going on in the world of wine at the time. We're talking back in sort of April, May time, really, and thinking about what we could do for this web offering. And at that point in time, obviously, everybody around the world was having a difficult time. Everyone was in lockdown, and many businesses were struggling. But what was coming through very loud and clear through the wine trade was that particularly there are sectors of the wine trade which depend very, very heavily on tourism and on the restaurant trades. And at that point in time, as we all know, Italy within Europe was the first country really to have really struggled well before we did here in the UK, actually. Italy and France, certain growers in France, and both those regions, when you think about the fact that both Italy and France are the number one, number two producing wine countries in the world, and a very important part of what we as wine lovers enjoy, we were thinking about, well, is there anything that we could actually do to A, help those producers and growers that are struggling, but B, also use that as an opportunity to source some new and exclusive wines from people that we've not known before. Obviously, because they're producers I've not come across or known before, I had to put out the feelers, and that's why I work very, very pleased to have spoken to both Michael and to Caroline, and to ask them to come up with some ideas about what might be out there, wines that were not normally exported or very little exported, and something that is completely new to us. So that's how this cellar offering came about. And I have to say, as Michael said, the response was absolutely tremendous. I'm going to speak to you, I'm going to taste one particular wine. I'm going to speak to you about the first wines in the Cellar offering. But before I do that, just to flag up also that this is the first offering where we've introduced the new subscription program called the Master's Case. I don't know where that name came from. So it's not, we're not going to talk too much about that today, because the wines, I talked about them last week. As it happens in this particular offering, they are 3 French wines, and they are fantastic wines, combination of wines that can be drunk now and have a little bit of cellaring potential. But the big difference between this particular case program, what we've done in the past, is that if you sign up for the program, once the wines get shipped to Canada, when the majority of members have actually had the opportunity to receive and to get their wines, we will actually set up a online tasting so that we can all taste them together. You can open the bottles and taste with me. You can just listen to me and look at the wines, or you can open 1 bottle or 3 bottles. It's completely down to you. But I think it's going to be a huge amount of fun and something really special. So I just flagged that up. I'm going to talk to you about the first wines in the Cellar offering from Cantina Beato Bartolomeo. And I'm so sorry, Caroline, for my Italian. I can speak French, but Italian is not so great. And the wine that I have chosen from the selection, I think we have 6 or 8 wines, 6 wines, I think, in the from this particular producer. The one that I've chosen is the white wine, the Vespaiolo, and that is because it really is a speciality from the region. So this Dio Braganza is in the northeast of Italy. It's within the Veneto area, but within that area there's a lot of very sort of flat, very high productive vineyards, producing some pretty good but sort of pretty simple wines. But there are spots within it, a bit like we talked about Languedoc last week. There are spots within that where you've got sort of slopes and hills and more interesting land where better quality, more interesting wines can be produced. And so this is a region that's actually known, it's developed a bit of a reputation for Pinot Noir. We have a Pinot Nero in the offering. We also have a Rosé in the offering, which I have a bottle of here. But as I say, the one I'm going to try is the white, and forgive me here, Caroline and Michael again, Les Prières, which is from Vespaiolo. It's got lovely white sort of stone fruits, lemon scents. The grape variety, it is said, is named after the fact because these grapes are so naturally sweet, they attract a lot of wasps around them in the vineyards. I'm not sure how true that really is, because lots of grapes get lots of sweetness, and so I don't know really whether they're that much sweeter than other things, but that's yes, Michael says it is true. Thumbs up. So I think it's just a delicious wine. It has a touch of residual sugar in there. I only know that because of the analysis, having looked at it, but it comes across very much as a dry wine. It's got a lovely crisp acidity, delicious sort of nectarine and stone fruits. And the version I'm tasting, which is lot number 2082, is the dry wine, but this grape variety is also well known for producing sweeter dessert sort of style wines. Not sure that there is much else to say about the winery itself. It's a cooperative that was founded, I think, in the 1950s. I've not been there, but I think the wines stood out in the tasting as being really very interesting wines, not your normal Veneto at all. And they don't normally, the majority of their wines are sold on the domestic market. They do have some export, but mainly through the restaurant trades. And again, that's why it's important to have found this producer for us for the interesting wines, but also hopefully bringing something to a struggling producer at the time. think probably time to move on to the next speaker. Michael, I don't know whether you wanted to interject at this point or move directed to Caroline.
Yeah, that's good. If we just wanted to mention a couple more of the Wine People wines that are out there, and just it ranges from 2079 to 2084, and I have put on the chat what one that you were just speaking to, Jane. So that works for me, and then I agree with you. I think that why don't we go to Caroline, and Caroline, you can talk about the Avenue wines that are in the CWEB20. Thank you.
Yes, hello, good evening. Well, it is a good evening for me at least, because it's 9 p.m. here in Italy. My name is Carolina, and my family is from Avenue, so we represent the Avenue selection that you'll see this at this offering. And I was able to we represent quite a lot of wineries, and I was happy to see Jane picking actually quite a few of our wines, so that was great. We not only represent wineries, we also produce wines, and hence we have and some of the wines actually you probably know, because we have been offering them through Opimian for many years, which are the A. von Keller wines, the Pinot Grigio, for example, that probably some of you know. Anyway, being a winemaker and being a wine producer, obviously we know a lot of wineries throughout Italy, and hence we represent quite a few of them on an international scale. And yeah, let's start. We have I believe it's 9 wineries, and we start with the very north, so with the Veneto region. Then we go a little bit south, kind of more central Italy, which is Tuscany, and then we go up again north, west to the Piedmont region. And yeah, so let's start with Maso Marroni. Maso Marroni is a family-owned winery in the Veneto area, and it's really, I have to say, it's in the Valpolicella area. So Valpolicella area, known obviously for producing Ripasso Amarone, so especially, and Valpolicella, and so on. So those wines that are very well known, also obviously on an international scale. Maso Marroni is a fairly young winery, because it was only founded in 2004. And prior to that, like many farmers in the area, were obviously delivering their grapes to large cooperatives. And only in 2004, they started vinifying their own grapes and kind of bottling them. And so they actually started with only 4 hectares of land, and then they grew now to 10 hectares of land. But still, obviously, 10 hectares, especially in the Valpolicella area and in the Veneto area, is a rather small winery, I have to say. It's actually, of the 3 Veneto wineries, it's certainly the smallest that we have. And it's run by Maura, Patricia, and Sophia. So it's totally family owned. Maura is the winemaker, so the father, the wife helps in promoting the wines, and she also has a gorgeous bed and breakfast. So if you ever want to visit them, they also have a gorgeous bed and breakfast right at the estate. And Sophia, and then there's I believe also another son. Both of them have studied or are studying winemaking, and with the idea of coming back and helping the family. It's a small winery, as I said, and it's all sustainably farmed, and they also have quite a lot of I shouldn't say awards, but approvals and labels for being a very sustainable estate. Hence, using no herbicides at all in the vineyards. Also in the cellar, it's all gravity driven. They try to intervene as little as possible, and with the idea of kind of preserving the vineyards and the wine, and intervene as little as possible. And we have 3 wines. Jane selected 3 wines of Maso Marroni, and they really are the typical wines of the region. So we have the 2085, which is the Maso Marroni Valpolicella, and really the way they are, I see them in front of me, that's really how they're structured. So we start with the Valpolicella, which is kind of more their the introduction to their wines, I should say. So it's kind of the lightest, the easiest drinking of all of them. Produced with Corvino, Corvinone, and Rondinella, which are the classic varieties that go into those kind of blends. And 2019 vintage. Then we have the 2086, which is the Valpolicella Ripasso Superiore. And the Ripasso is obviously another technique, wine making technique that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. It's Ripasso, an Italian name referring to a kind of fermentation using the pomace of the Amarone wine that is being produced. So it's a kind of a second product from the Amarone that is being produced. And it's definitely rounder and kind of more structured than the Valpolicella one that we have. And it's matured in oak for several months before being bottled and sold then. And obviously their most important wine obviously is the Amarone, right? And Amarone is really where the, I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with the Amarone technique where grapes are being dried for many days. I believe it's over 100 days, 120 days I see in their case. And they're dried so that they lose about 50% of their original weight, right? So they really shrink. And what happens when grapes shrivel down and shrink, they get very, very concentrated, accumulate in sugars, but lose weight, and hence are very, very sweet when they start processing them. And then they are, after fermentation, they are the wine is aged for about 24 to 30 months, depending on kind of the vintage, in oak barrels. So it's definitely a full-bodied style. It's a wine that you can drink now, but ages also beautifully, and it's certainly the highlight of this winery. Their most important wine, I should say. Michael, you have to tell me when I'm going too fast or too slow on the wines.
Yeah, I think you're good going on to the next one and going through the 4 from Montepulciano a little quicker. And
okay, good. Yeah, so Antichello, let me just tell you a little bit about, I always like to explain kind of probably more about the family than the actual wine itself, because it's when we make wine, it's really all about the people that are behind the wine. So Antichello is a gorgeous, again, family-owned winery in the Veneto area. It's actually a good friend of mine, and we were actually talking because it's a non-competing winery, so very often you call each other and you talk and you share thoughts, and he was telling me, just like I think it was just in April, like how difficult it was for him, because he just sells a lot to the Italian market, and he said how challenging the situation was. And this is right at the time when you kind of sent your email saying we want to do this web offering. So I called him again and said, hey, why don't you send some of the wines and let me see what Jane thinks about them. And I'm glad like Jane enjoyed them and picked 4 of his wines. And it's Antichello was fairly young. It was founded in 1967. And when they purchased a historic winery from the area called Santa Sofia Winery. And now it's Luciano, who's a friend of mine, and who's running now the winery together with his brother. And yeah, so actually we have a, yeah. And it's his labels, as you'll see, they're very youthful, young. And I think that's also the kind of the style of wine that he's aiming for. The Antichello is actually refers to, is a fantasy character inspired by 19th and 20th century children literature. And the way he always explains it is that wine for him is somehow like a magical performance. You need a territory, but you also need the vintner with the magic stick. That's the stick that you should see on the label, to kind of make that wine. And that's kind of his belief on winemaking, and hence this kind of label. We have here 4 wines, and we start with the most important of his wines, again, the Amarone style of wine. I think personally I really enjoyed also his Ripasso, again re-fermented on pomace of the Amarone, and probably a little bit more youthful, I thought, than the Maso Marroni. Then we have Valpolicella, which is kind of really the everyday wine. But interestingly, here we also have the Barolo, which is number 2091. And Bardolino is a very nice wine. It's really it's an easy drinking everyday red wine. And you know, I love great wines. I love wines that you can age, and you know, and wines where you meditate on. But sometimes you just want a nice glass of good wine, and I think Bardolino is the answer to that. It's easy drinking, fresh, fruity, vibrant red wine, and really that you can pair with a lot of kinds of foods, or you just have it by itself. So I was happy to see the Bardolino being chosen, because I think it's one of the, I don't think we've offered very often Barolino with Opimian yet. So I think it was, Jane, one of your New York picks. And yeah, then we have Villamondi. Villamondi is out of the three wineries that we have from the Veneto area is probably the most established winery. It was it was founded in the early 20th century, and it's now 5 generations that they have been making wines. And it's in the classic area, again, of the Valpolicella area. But not only do they produce Valpolicella wines, they also make quite a lot of white wines, actually. It's a lot of Soave and made with Canega being made. It was founded by the Campagnola family, Carlo Campagnola, and his wife, Caterina. She passed away very early. So he passed away very early. So she was the one kind of actually running the winery for many years. And then she passed it over to her sons. And it was actually 10 children. So the youngest of the sons finally then decided to run the winery. He's bought out the other 9 of his siblings, and continued making the wine. He collaborates now with 50 growers from the area, and they work on 80 hectares of land. So it's this traditional winery that has though transitioned to kind of a more of a modern winery for sure. They also kind of started becoming bigger and bigger, and have a very beautiful, actually, new winery. And as I said, they do make reds and whites. So not only we have the classic red Valpolicella wines, like, for example, the 2104, which is the founder's choice, the Valpolicella Ripasso Superiore, but also they have the 2 whites that I really love, the Soave especially, Soave classic wine from that area. Soave is one of the biggest DOCs in the area of the Veneto, and you find a lot of different qualities out there. I think the Villamondi makes a very neat and elegant and fine Soave, kind of nice fruit, but mineral driven, great salinity on it, and it's definitely a wine that you can pair with lots of foods, but also just have by itself. And yeah, otherwise a great everyday wine is certainly also the red Villamondi Merlot and Corvina blend. Exactly, it's kind of a little bit softer and smoother and so on, which was the 2093. Sorry, no, I was talking about the 2092, sorry. All right. And
if I can interject there briefly, Carolina, you made reference to our Founder's Choice program, and those of you on the call that might not be familiar with it, it's our subscription series that if you sign up for Founder's Choice, then we automatically order one for you on every Cellar offering, so you get 10 each year. And it's Jane chooses a Founder's Choice wine to be a quality wine that it still arrives in drinkable condition, that you can drink it right away, but it's also intended to be cellarable as well. So what I typically do, I'm a member of the Founder's Choice program, and I'll drink one upon arrival so I get a sense of that wine and make some notes to myself. And then I'll start drinking them 1 year at a time. And I usually leave the 6th one for a few extra years to see how it ages into an older wine. So you can sign up for that on your dashboards if you're an Opimian member. And if you're not an Opimian member, then you should be talking to me. Thanks, Caroline. You can keep going.
Right. And now let's move. So we've covered quite a lot of the Veneto region, and we've covered the 3 wineries that we represent from the Veneto region. Now let's move more central, central Italy. Let's move to actually the Montepulciano area, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. And it's kind of lies kind of halfway between Florence and Rome, roughly. And the Ferrari Corbelli estate is actually one of the oldest wineries in the Montepulciano area. And it was founded in the early 19th century with the Svettoni family that founded the winery right then. And nowadays they have 70 hectares of land, although only 20 are under vine. They have a very historic old cellar, which is beautiful also to visit, but they also have, you know, grown and added a kind of a new state-of-the-art small winery. And but they've always had, I have to say, external winemakers, so that the family owns it, but they've also always hired some really I should almost say world famous winemakers that they've hired to kind of vinify their grapes. And Beppe Rigoni, for example, is the latest of the current one they had. It's definitely more of definitely traditional wines that they make, and yeah, they kind of tend to stick to their tradition. And so in the Montepulciano area, obviously what he makes is Vino Nobile del Montepulciano. So it's a DOCG. So don't forget the DOCG is the highest denomination that we have in Italy. And the wine that was the 2000 and what vintage was it? 2016 that was chosen, and great vintage by the way, 2016. Slightly fantastic vintage, made of old wines, mainly from old vines. So they go from the 1970s to late 90s. So definitely old vines, and hence you see low yields, more concentrated grapes. Vino Nobile del Montepulciano is 100% Sangiovese basically, but the Sangiovese that is grown in that area from the clone called Bugnolo Gentile, right? So, but in the end, it's Sangiovese as a variety, 95%, and only 5% Merlot that kind of adds the smoothness and the softness of the wine. And yeah, so that was the wine 2096 that I was just talking about. And then we have another winery in Tuscany, but different area now. And we're moving to the Chianti Classico area. And Chianti Classico area is certainly, I mean, not only Chianti Classico, but all of Tuscany, I really have to say that they have been suffering a lot from what has been happening or what has been going on the last 6-7 months, because Tuscany depends a lot on their direct sales. So what they sell directly to tourists is huge, is a huge portion of their sales. So obviously all of the the 2 wineries, 3 actually, they have been suffering a lot. I have to say that, and especially also in the Chianti Classico area, which is a very touristy area, especially tourists from overseas countries like the US, like Canada, like Australia. All of these people have been missing. So for them, it was a great opportunity that Opimian gave them the chance to to still show the wines and sell their wines. Campopazzo hence lies in the area between, really in the heart of the Chianti Classico area, between Panzano and Radda. Probably some of you have already visited those gorgeous, gorgeous romantic towns. And Campopazzo is named after one of their major vineyards called Campopazzo, and Campopazzo in Italian refers to, means actually the crazy field, and the reason they explained me why they called him the field crazy field is that it is a very steep vineyard with full of stones, and hence it's a lot of manual work, and it's a lot of hard work. And especially back in the days, they said, and when a worker had to work that site for more than 1 week, that person would go crazy because of the hard work. So that's why this land, this piece of land, was then called the crazy field, so Campopazzo, and this is the name of the winery. It's an organic winery. They work on 45 hectares of land, mainly all planted with Sangiovese. And it's Also Campobazzo, it's a family-owned winery, and they have been making wine since 1961. And yeah, and I always like the way when they talk about their history and when they represent their wines, because I have to say that the family actually comes from a different business. They were actually in the insurance business prior to that, and only in the 60s, the father fell in love with the land and decided to move there with his family and started vine growing, I have to say. And again, vine growing meaning that he was selling the grapes to other wineries. And he now always says, like, with our Sangiovese, we have made other great brands of the Chianti Classico area. And only later, they decided to, only in the year 2000, they decided to bottle their own wines, right? But they have been growing wines for longer than that. And the 2097, hence Chianti Classico 2016 vintage, is 2016 is what is being released in right now in the Chianti Classico area. It was really, really top-notch vintage for the Chianti Classico area, for sure. Yeah, and then the last winery that we have from Tuscany is called Torre Guelfa, and it's Brunello. So a completely different style. So really all three wines or three wineries are from different sub-regions within Tuscany, and hence their styles are very, very different. And now we're moving to the Brunello di Montalcino area and wine, which is obviously a world famous appellation. Torre Guelfa is a fairly young family winery. It only dates back to 2013, when the winemaker Alberto Passeri decided, after working for many, many years as a director and as a winemaker in other wineries, to make small batches of his own wine. And so a fairly young history, and the name Torre Guelfa reminds, Torre meaning tower in Italian, translates to tower, and hence reminds all the various towers that are in that area, in that kind of area. It's a sustainable and organic winery, although he likes to say that they're not certified yet. And yeah, 2015 vintage, certainly a warmer vintage, but you'll see it's a fabulous wine, and even a wine that will still age beautifully. And yeah, and then I believe we should move to northwest again of Italy. And let's talk about the Cascina Chicco. Yes, is the first one on the list. So from 2099 to 2101. So we have one, two, three wines of Cascina Chicco. And Cascina Chicco,
Carolina,
really,
we had a specific question about 2100 and speaking a little bit about the Nebbiolo grape, if you could be specific about that during this little bit.
Yeah. So Cascina Chicco, let me first just tell you a little bit about the estate itself, because it's a beautiful winery. It's all a family-owned winery, and it's they have been making wines since the 1950s for four generations already. But they started as a butcher, so it was actually a butcher family, and only then the second generation, I believe it was, that's when they started making wine. They've always been very eager, and actually this year, for the first time, I believe, they have received the Trebbichieri for their, that was the question, for their Barolo, the 2101, right? And Trebbichieri, for those who are not familiar with that award, Trebbichieri is an award that from Gambero Rosso, which is one of the most important Italian wine critics. And he gave the three glasses, so the Trebbichieri, to this wine. Trebbichieri is the highest award that you can get. So having a Trebbichieri wine in this offering, I think, was great. And it came out only after Jane has picked the wine. And when I told Jane about, hey, actually this wine got the Trebbichieri, Jane wasn't surprised, because she said she really liked it a lot. And yeah, so Cascina Chicco, family-owned winery, sustainably farmed, and now it's the young sons that really carry along the wine. And as I said, they're very eager in producing the highest quality wines and really reflecting their territory and their sites. And the Barolo that we're having with the vintage 2016, exactly, comes from the Rocca di Castelletto, which is a beautiful site that they have there, and it's all family owned vineyards. Obviously Barolo made of 100% Nebbiolo grape, and Nebbiolo is this classic Piemonte grape, which is picked very late. It's one of the latest ripening grape varieties that they have. And I believe this year harvest only finished not even 2 weeks ago. And so generally mid-late October, that's when they harvest the grapes. It's they do a lot of green harvesting, and that starts in late July, early August. So basically cut off side wings in the bottom of the bunch to really only have a small heart remaining on the vine, so that really kind of is able to mature the full spectrum of the primary aromas. And because Nebbiolo tends to be quite a tannic and hard and harsh a grape variety, and very light in color, but it's one of those probably most elegant Italian grape varieties red grape varieties at the same time, because these are the wines that really mature for many years. And I'm sure so does this Barolo Rocca di Castelletto from Cascina Chicco. And yeah, so that was 2101. 2101, which comes from a winery called Aresca. Again, Aresca is a family winery that was founded in 1952, fairly young. It's now the second and third generation that kind of continue making wine.
I'm sorry, Carolina, I believe that's 2102, just to be clear. The Aresca.
Sorry, you're right. Yes.
2101 was the medal winner you referred to, correct?
Yes, correct.
Yes,
2101 was you're absolutely right. Yes.
Super. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
No trouble.
And yeah, Aresca, it's really a classic Piemonte winery. Small, it's smaller than Cascina Chicco for sure. It's very small, and they mainly sell domestically and depend heavily on tourism. And yeah, they told me like how tricky it was also for them and how difficult it still is when you basically depend only on your cellar doors or on your tasting room when selling wines. And hence they do about, I think it's over 70% that they sell domestically, which is very rare, because generally the Piemonte wines generally tend to kind of be more heavily focused on the export. So having a winery that actually does in the Piemonte area 70% domestic, that's very rare to find. And yeah. What else to say? Exactly, and the 2102 Aresca is a Nebbiolo, so right? If you want to get to know the Nebbiolo grape variety, I think this is a great example of a classic Nebbiolo wine. And finally, we have the Clemente Guasti winery, and we're still in Piemonte. Clemente Guasti is a winery that was founded just after World War II by Clemente Guasti, and it's from an early age on he believed, so it's basically the father of who's now running the winery, and who believed that who believed in the real cruise from the area. So he was really a promoter of making wines that are a true reflection of one single site, and to promote that single site was limited and yeah, limited to a certain plot only. So yeah, and from an early age onwards, so also promoter of the Nizza, which is a crew of the Barbera area. And now, yes, exactly, now it's in its second generation, so it's now the son of Clemente Guasti, who's running the winery. And here we have his Diana Barbera d'Asti, so that's the 2103, right? And which is made in a very classic way, I would say Clemente Guasti is really, as a promoter from his cruise, from single vineyard wines, from real single vineyard wines, he really sticks to the tradition. He likes the traditions, and he uses large wooden oak casks to mature the wines. And again, it's wines that might be a little bit kind of more harsher in the beginning, but they need time, and they really will soften up. But you see already with the Clemente Guasti 2019 kind of which direction the wine will go. And hence it's more of a traditional style, but very elegantly made. Yeah.
All set. Great. And any other questions about the Avenue wines that Carolina has been speaking of? Thank you very much, Carolina, for that. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
And I hope that has helped people have a better connection with each of the wines that have been offered. And it's always very helpful for us to hear from the people that are bringing us these wines. So thank you again. So without seeing any others, I'll turn to Michael Pele. I was fortunate enough to go to do a couple of Opimian tastings with Michael here in Kitchener and one in Toronto, and we had a good time a couple of years ago. And so he has provided some wines for CWEB20 as well from, I'm not sure I'm even willing to say Clavisana. How's that, Michael? And
perfect.
And I don't know if you've been watching the group chat, but there has been a specific question about 2105. So if you can spend a bit of time on that, and then I'll just let you go. Off you go. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Michael. And Inez, if you could please just put up the wines and the numbers, that would be great, so everybody can follow along. Much appreciated. So I'm going to have to go back to the Second World War to introduce this particular estate and these wines. So if you know a little bit about Italian history, you'll know that in the Second World War, Italy jumped the wrong way. And so it emerged in 1945 in this invidious position where half of the population was still kind of pro-Mussolini and sort of fascist leaning. And yet at the end of the Second World War, of course, Russia had come out as a big victor against fascism. And of course, there were plenty of people in Italy who kind of wanted to band with the communists. And so America, in their wisdom, propped up what essentially became the mafia, because they were supporting, in a sense, the fascists, because they were anti-communist at all costs. And so from 1945 onwards, Italy essentially had a civil war. And this was a terribly difficult time. Economically, this was the origins of the Italian diaspora. It's wherever you go in the world, there's a pizzeria somewhere, because Italians were desperate to leave their country at that point. And so the government responded to this to help agriculture by establishing co-ops. So as of today, there are 1 million people in Italy who in their passport have grape grower as their occupation. 1 million people. Think about that. And there are only 20,000 bottlers. So the 980,000 people, they sell all their grapes to the co-ops. So the wines we're going to be looking at this evening from Clavisana are resolutely not from a family winery. So these are from a co-op. Now, I have to say that in my long history of working with Italy, and I've been going to Italy hundreds of times since 1991, when I was a buyer for a small chain of shops in the UK. You know, co-ops never really figure on the radar because they make terrible wine, and it's really only the family producers that you're interested in. And I have to say, Clavisana is a sort of notable exception. So they were founded in 1959. They had 32 members at that point. And this was a ragtag bunch of people who were basically clubbing together to take advantage of government subsidies to build a winery. So they all had their tiny bits of vineyards and they had nowhere to make their wine. So they formed a co-op in Clavisana. And so the Clavisana Co-op is in the heart of a town called Dogliani in Piemonte. And it's just south of Barolo. And there's a couple of interesting things to say about that. So because it's outside of the formal boundary of Barolo, even if you grew Nebbiolo there, you couldn't call it Barolo. And so they thought, well, the soils are pretty much the same, so high limestone content. What could we do? What could we plant instead? And so they focused on Dolcetto. And they planted Dolcetto, which is still 85% of their production. And then they also decided to plant some other varieties as well, including Barbera and of course Nebbiolo. And so the co-op grew and grew and grew. And there's this brilliant photo when you go into the co-op in the I don't know, like the entry hall. There's a photo of all the members from 1989, and the 32 original members were all alive 30 years later. And there's this brilliant photo of them all there now today. In 2020, there's 215 members, and the co-op's much bigger now, obviously, and they make upwards of 2 million bottles a year. But what struck me about the co-op the first time I went there was the quality of the wines, and I just thought, this is amazing. The prices are reasonable and the quality's exceptional. Now, focusing in on COVID and Opimian Society and how all these things sort of knit together at the moment. That area, Dogliani's obviously famous for its wines, but it's also famous for something else, and that's Bolito Misto. And Bolito Misto would translate literally as sort of mixed boiled. And this is an absolutely ancient tradition where you go to a Bolito Misto restaurant and they push around this sort of trolley, and on the trolley are all these different cuts of meat, and you decide what, it's like a mobile buffet, and you decide what you want, and then they scoop on all these delicious sauces, and of course that's brilliant with these local grape varieties and local wines. So they have a huge trade in the bulk market. So actually, if you go into the front of the winery, the locals can go in and with basically an empty canister, like a 5-liter plastic jug, and just fill up from what looks exactly like a petrol pump, and fill up the container and pay by the liter. So they still do a lot of that, which is a traditional way that most wine, by volume, still most wine is sold in Italy. And then they have a flourishing business with the restaurants. And of course, in time of COVID, all the restaurants were forced to shut. So Lombardia was the epicenter of COVID. And I know some of you will remember this from February, where we watched those numbers in Italy. And I remember thinking, I hope to Christ it doesn't ever come to the UK, as bad as it is in Italy. And of course, we all know that that did not come to pass. And the UK was hit very hard, but Italy had it first. And as a sort of side note, I wonder if Italy hadn't responded just as vigorously as they had with this sort of total lockdown, whether the rest of the world would ever have had the gumption to do that. And I think actually we have quite a lot to thank Italy for, that they grabbed the bull by the horns there back in February with COVID. But anyway, in Piemonte, next door to Lombardia, of course, everybody in Piemonte was petrified, all the restaurants shut, and it was complete lockdown. I have to say that I've been instructed to say personally thank you from Gianluca and Alessio at Clavisana for your support. It really means a lot to them, I have to say, in this moment where nobody's buying wine from them. This is a big deal. So thank you very much. Things have sort of opened up a bit more, but of course with the social distancing we're seeing everywhere. And today it's slightly better than it was back in February. But these were really dark days for these wineries whose business is the on-trade, right? Whose business is restaurants. And of course in Italy, everybody goes out to eat. Nobody eats at home. Everybody goes out to eat, and it's a huge part of their business. So the 4 wines which we have, so 15, 16, 17, and 18. I don't have the list in front of me, so I'm just going to go through the wines. And I also want to tell you my favorite, which is sort of slightly embarrassing because my favorite's the white. So my favorite is this one. So this is the Roero Arneas, and I don't know if you have the number there. So this is nowhere near Dogliani. This is the northern part of Piemonte. The grape varieties are Arneas, and it's grown on these very steep, sandy soils, which are kind of atypical for most of Piemonte, which is clay and limestone. And so the Roero Arneas is brilliant. So this is a 2019 vintage. So 17 was really hot. 16 was perfect. 17 was really hot. 18 was better than 17, so a bit more moderate, and 19 was like stunning. I reckon the 19s are as good as anything I've tasted out of Piemonte probably since 2004. So better than 2010. So great, 2019, great vintage. So this is 2019, and it just has a freshness and a liveliness, and I can see this being served with just a simple pasta, and just pan fry some prawns. and stick those on top with loads of garlic, and die and go to heaven. It's a simple white wine, stainless steel fermented, but 13.5 alcohol, which I don't think you feel at all. I think it carries that really well. And I was actually having a little cheeky glass of that earlier on because I thought it was tasting really good. So so that's the first wine, the Ribera Aeneas. And despite the fact that the members who supply the grapes are not from the traditional region, that for me is still kind of the winner here. And the next one after that, I don't know if I'm going in the right order. This is the Barbera Dalba. And so Barbera Dalba is one of these Piemontese gigantic DOCs. It covers an area sort of the size of Texas, and everything goes into Barbera Dalba. And there are, as Caroline was saying, there are now specific, in fact, there's a specific DOCG called Nizza with set subzones for Barbera at the moment. But Barbera Dalba is the big one. And this is a lovely crunchy red. So the thing you need to remember about Barbera is the acidity. So it's a high acid red, and not very high tannins, but it's the acidity. So this is like kind of the ideal charcuterie wine. So if you've got a plate of salami and cheese or something you're having before the meal, then Barbera is just a dream for that. This is 2018 vintage, and 13 point, I think it's 13.5. So the same as the Ribera Aeneas. And this sees some old oak, but the oak, I'm really pleased to say that in Piemonte, the use of oak has come down and down and down and down from the heady days of the early 1990s when I was going there and everything was in 100% new French oak. So this is in large old oak for a very brief period of time, 6 months, just to soften it a tiny bit. But as I said, tannins aren't really the point of this wine. So this is about crunchy acidity, freshness, vibrancy. And this is the thing Italy does so well. You know, native Italian grape varieties have managed to hang on to this kind of the holy trinity of acidity, alcohol, and tannins. This is what marks out Italian red wines. It's a thing which makes Italian red wines never perform well in competitions. And Jane will know what it's like in a competition. You're tasting 100 or more wines a day. And of course, the last thing you want is this great big Italian beast, you know, with tannins and acidity and alcohol. You want a nice, soft, plush Chilean Cabernet. So they run away with all the gold medals. And Italy really is struggling against fundamentally what it is to be wine, which is encapsulated in Italian wines better than anywhere else in the world. But it's that structure which makes them go with food. So if you're having food, then that's really where Italian wines come into their own, and why I love them so much. So that's the Barbera. And next up is this Langhe Nebbiolo. And there's a sort of slightly funny story here about Langhe Nebbiolo versus Nebbiolo Dalba. And back in the day, many years ago, when they were coming up with all the legislation around Barolo and Barbaresco, the producers of Nebbiolo, who were not in Barolo or Barbaresco, were upset that their Nebbiolo sold for so much less than the Nebbiolo that was grown in Barolo and Barbaresco. So they argued that because Nebbiolo Dalba was seen to be a superior DOC, if you produced Nebbiolo in Barolo or Barbaresco that you didn't want to call Barolo or Barbaresco, then you had to declassify it to this much lowlier DOC of Langhe Nebbiolo. Fast forward 20 years and everybody's cottoned on to the fact that Langhe Nebbiolo is sort of baby Barolo, and the price has shot up. So now the people making Langhe Nebbiolo Dalba are saying, oh, well, please, could we call our wine Langhe Nebbiolo as well? So recently they enlarged Langhe Nebbiolo to include all of the other areas, and everybody who was making Nebbiolo Dalba overnight started calling it Langhe Nebbiolo. So now you can no longer tell if it's declassified Barolo or not. But so this, I can tell you, is declassified Barolo. Also from 2018, which is this lovely, slightly cooler vintage. So I was talking to Michael last night. We had a very quick Zoom just to ensure that I knew how to actually use this program, as technology is not my strong point. And it turned out that all was well. And we were talking about the Langhe Nebbiolo and the drinkability. And I actually think you can drink this. Michael was saying we should probably stick it away for a few years, which you absolutely can do. I'm not suggesting you have to drink it now. But I tried some earlier and I thought it was great, drinking really well. And in that kind of cooler vintage, you got these sort of lovely red fruit aromas, which I think work well with food. Langhe Nebbiolo, obviously a much more serious animal. Nebbiolo is a grape variety which suffers horribly from natural mutation. So clonal selection is really, really important with Nebbiolo to make sure that you're working with the top top quality clones, and they're all over that in Italy at the moment. And this Langhe Nebbiolo has that like lovely crunchy red fruit, and obviously the structure from Nebbiolo with the tannins, acidity, and alcohol. And I would put this with beef. Really, I think is Piedmont has its own breed of cattle called Fassone. And they're very proud of that. And so if you're eating in the Langhe, they do this dish which is like carne cruda, which is just chopped up Fassone raw, served raw. And if you go this time of year, you get some truffles grated on top at extra charge. And I think that with Langhe Nebbiolo is just perfect. And then the last, so the last one, I don't know the number of this one. This is the Barolo. So all four are made from Clavisana from the Co-op, and this is their Barolo. And this is 2015. So in the pantheon of great recent vintages, 15 is right up there, but it had the misfortune to come just before 16, and I'd probably give 16 the edge over 15. So 19 would be the best, then probably 16, then 15, and then you'd have to go back to 10 would be my top 4 vintages of the last decade. So this is 2015, a wonderful vintage. Michael was talking earlier about trying the 2014 from Cabuto, and I think, you know, I remember many years ago I was told that anybody can make great wine in a good vintage, and I always think that it's the measure of an estate in a poor vintage like 2014 to see what you can do with it, and that's where producers have to work extra hard. Nobody has to do anything in a great vintage. So 2015 was a very generous vintage. It was a warm vintage, and that comes across in this wine with really ripe fruit. And with Barolo, I always say like you just get an extra gear there. So part of that is from the oak aging, although this is aged in large oak, but you've got red fruit, black fruit, floral notes, and then you should be picking up something kind of like tobacco or forest floor, something pleasantly vegetal, which for me kind of gives that edge to, I don't know, gives that edge to Barolo, I guess, over Langhe Nebbiolo. And then it's had obviously a few more years before it's been released. So the Barolo 2015, I think buy that, and I'd probably say keep it for a little bit longer. I had a quick taste of that earlier on, and I thought actually it's still pretty structured at the moment, and no hurry with that one at all. So if you're cellaring, if you're looking to cellar something, then I think the Barolo is a good bet, and I'd probably tuck that away for a while. And I think that's really all I wanted to say, other than thank you for your time and joining us tonight. If I could take you all to see the winery, I can assure you get the warmest possible welcome on planet Earth, and then they'd stuff you full of Bolito Misto and Barolo. And in fact, I think that's a wonderful idea, and you should probably all go and do that. But they're really, despite the fact they've got 200 members, the atmosphere is incredibly warm and welcoming, and they're really proud of their relationship with Opimian, and are delighted that you're supporting them.
Okay, well, thank you so very much, Michael. I appreciate your time and for your being here, and for everybody to be here. And Jane, I think you've noticed on the chat that there's a question about decanting. If you could address that one. Oh, sure, Jane. It's about that David is thinking that Italian wines rarely need decanting, not in the same way as Bordeaux does. And what's your opinion of that, Jane? Or have you an opinion?
Well, I do have an opinion. I mean, Michael probably has more of an opinion about Italian wines than me, but and I wouldn't say that necessarily Italian or Piemonte wines are more or less decantable than Bordeaux wines, actually. I think you have to look at each individual wine itself, and I don't tend to decant a lot of wines. I actually tend to open up a bottle and taste the wine and find out just how it's expressing itself at the time. It depends why you do. If you're talking about decanting it to try and eliminate sediment in the bottle, sediment in my mind, as long as you're gentle with the bottle, doesn't actually bother me that much if it's just right down at the bottom. But if you're talking about decanting in order to bring out the aroma, bring out the flavors, bring out, and drink the wine when it's at its best, then I think the best thing is to taste it and to see how open or closed it is. And it's only if you're getting very, very little from a wine, and you're swirling it around in your glass and it's still very tight and there's not much coming out, then by all means, I would tend to decant it, get a nice decanter with a sort of a big decanter, so it can really aerate it and swirl that decanter as you're pouring it in, so to get all those aromas and things out. Michael, I don't know whether you have any other views. I think that many Italian wines are very closed when they're quite young, and they do take a bit of aeration. Perhaps you can add something to that.
And I'm sure she means Michael Pelly.
Yeah.
Gosh, I'd assumed that, Michael. It's very rude of
Yes,
me.
me too.
Look, I agree with everything you said. I think the only thing I'd add is that, when we talk about Bordeaux and we drink Bordeaux, we have this great canon of old vintages. So I don't know, say you were at Chateau Latour and you tried the 2019 and you said, oh, well, I'm not sure I like that very much, will it improve? And then they could open, 40 vintages and show you how wonderful it became. But I don't know if we could do that. We talked about some great wines tonight, like Barolo, Barbaresco, Brunello, what we call the killer bees. Can we say Barolo ages? Can we say Brunello ages? Can we say that Amarone ages in the way we could say Bordeaux ages? Where you've got a petit chateau and it's going to go a decade kind of without a problem. And the great wines of Bordeaux will age 40 or 50 years. I challenge anybody, myself included, to name a great Italian wine pre-1985. No, so 82. Pre-82. Not a wine that you made an apology for and said, oh, it's pretty good, but a wine you swooned for in the way that you would in Bordeaux or Burgundy. I mean, I can count them on the fingers of one hand. And I think that this is a reflection of the fact that Italy's winemaking it's an ancient country for winemaking, but modern Italy's probably 20 or 30 years old. And I just don't think it has the history of creating wines of incredible longevity the way that Bordeaux does. So when we take a bottle of Bordeaux, we kind of already know, it's 82, I won't decant it, or it's 96, I'd better decant it. Whereas in Italy, I think you have to do what Jane said and just, try it and go, well, I'll put that in a decanter or I won't put that in a decanter.
Right.
I think the other thing I would add, Michael, to what you've said about Italian wines and wine quality and this people striving to produce, really high quality wines. And I think there's a lot of work actually in previous decades that has happened in the vineyards themselves. So you mentioned Nebbiolo, but Sangiovese also, there were many growers growing clones with very high yields. The wines that they were producing were pretty average, quite thin, not very interesting. And so I think there's a huge amount of work that's happened in the vineyards, clonal selection, and then actually the winemakers. I think I agree with you. You've seen a lot of experimentation even in the last 20 years. So people have gone from using lots of old oak casks to then moving to using new small French oak barriques to then coming back a bit to the previous way. So there's a lot of, I think, testing the water and sort of moving things forward all the time, probably more so than in an area like Bordeaux, where perhaps practices have been a bit more established for, there's still that attitude to constantly striving to do better, but there are perhaps practices that have been more established for longer.
Yeah, I mean, no, complete. But can you imagine going into, I don't know, Mouton and seeing, 4,000 liter barrels, and that's what's happening in Piemonte. We've gone from 4,000 liter barrels to barriques back to 4,000 liter barrels. I mean, this would be unthinkable in Bordeaux. And so this state of flux has really created wines that stylistically are still trying to find their own métier, their own road, and they're getting there. And I think we're now, in these years, Italy's really finding its feet. But the other thing, I mean, I remember going to Tuscany and you go to these vineyards and it's like 1,000 vines per hectare, right? And the yield per vine must have been, I don't know, like 200 kilos or something. It was just bananas. And that's now, particularly in Chianti Classico is the first region where they've now put in a minimum planting density. It's the first DOCG in Italy where they've done that. So it is starting to change.
Masters of wine.
I'm
going to bring you back to the question at hand, which is, should you be decanting wines from Italy as you would those from Bordeaux? And I think that answer was that if you find it tight, then get some air on it and it'll open it up for you, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And Carolina, I think you're going to be up for this one. I see one way back in the chat for 2088, which, and let's do an Italian lesson here. It looks to me like if there's an H after the C, you say K, and if there is no H, you say Ch. Is that correct? And Carolina, you're muted. There you go.
Okay, can you hear me? Good.
Yes.
So the question was about 20, which one did you say? 88?
2088. So it's the
Okay.
Antichello, not cello, right? Antichello.
Antichello. If there's an
Antichello
H,
Amarone.
exactly. If there's
Yeah.
an H after the C, then it's che. So Antichello.
Okay.
Antichello Amarone.
If you can speak a little bit more about that, please.
Yeah, sure. So Antichello Amarone is 100%. Sorry, is an Amarone wine made. It's obviously a blend, like all the Amarones are. In this case, the producer said it's 70% of Corvina and Corvinone, and the rest is 25 is Rondinella and Molinare. And they dry their grapes in kind of those aerated rooms for like 3 months, and only then they vinify, right? So soft pressing and destemming of those dried and very, very heavily concentrated grapes, as I said in the very beginning, and then a long fermentation and maturation in large Slavonian oak casks. So some of them are really, really large. They go up to 50 hectoliters of volume, so fairly large oak cask. And then bottle aged prior to being released. So this vintage, which is the help me, the 16, that's their current vintage of the Amarones. As you'll see, it's stored, it's matured in the bottle for quite some time before being released. And Jane, maybe you want to describe the wine, if that was one of the questions.
And there are some tasting notes for 2088 I have in front of me, Jane, if you'd like, or if you have them there. Oh, and you are now, you are muted, Jane. Isn't Zoom fun?
Sorry, can you actually see me or
yes,
not now? Okay.
Absolutely.
I've also got on my screen my original tasting notes. So I'm not sure exactly, I don't want to just read out what's in the leaflet, but for me, what came across, this wine is still, I mean, it's delicious. It's scored, actually, it was one of the higher scoring wines in the thing. I can share that with you. It's got a very sort of cedary, spicy aroma. The oak comes through quite strongly, but it's got lovely, the production process that Caroline has just described. You can smell and taste the raisin fruit in there. It's just delicious. They've got succulent fruit flavors in there, but that real raisined character, ripe cherries, red apples, and with a long sort of spicy seasoning on the finish. And I think for me, it's a wine that you can drink now and enjoy, but actually it's still very young. It's got a lot of life ahead of it. And that's probably one of the wines that, whilst I'm saying, yes, you can drink it straight away, probably I would be tucking it away for a good few years before I drank too many of the bottles in the case. So
that's great.
That
Thanks, Shane. And while everybody's been talking, I've been trying to find a way of deflecting this next question, which is the if you could only buy one of the Barolos, which one would you buy? And I think that's kind of like choosing your favorite child and saying to the world, my favorite child is so-and-so. So I think we'll try and dodge that one unless anybody wants to step up. I didn't think so. So are there any other questions? It doesn't look like there is, and we're at 4:15 in Ontario and Quebec. So, is anyone in QC wanting to split lots? So there you are. There's an email address in the group chat that if you'd like to split any lots in Quebec, to reach out to Tristan. Tristan, I think you approached me about what my suggestion was during the French one, and unfortunately we can't send wines across borders. So that reminds me that I'm looking for anybody who might be interested in buying all 61 lots with me. I'm looking for 5 friends so that we can share a bottle We'll each take a bottle from each lot. There's 5 that are 12s, cases of 12, so you'd get 2 from that. And if anybody is interested, they can get a hold of me through member service or directly if they have that. So may I, and Jane, any closing remarks before I thank everybody?
No, I think what's nice to hear from both Caroline and Michael, and actually before I say anything else, I want to thank both of you for actually putting in the time and effort to come up with these really exciting wines, because I know it's been a difficult year for everybody. You know, it's not been easy for anyone, but in many ways this is the every cloud has a silver lining. It's been absolutely fascinating for me and really interesting to come across and to find some really exceptional wines like this. And I think it's lovely to hear that the producers are very happy and thanking us for actually helping them hopefully through this difficult financial period. But I would say that actually for us, equally important to find some really interesting wines and producers and quality. And I would say none of these wines, this is not a sort of, it's not a charity that we're doing. We're not doing it just because we want to help people out. We're doing it because it works for both sides. The wines are great. You know, it's been a great exercise for me. I really look forward to tasting more of the wines from these particular producers. And thank you to Michael and to Caroline and to Stefano Girelli and his team at the Wine People for having been the people on the ground that I could tap into, the network that we could tap into to actually create this offering. So thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Jane. And let me continue with those thank yous both to Michael and Carolina for joining us. And I wanted to thank Anaïs Philippe from our head office who runs these Zoom calls for us. She's our events coordinator, and you'd think that given that we have no in-person events that was going to be a problem. Well, it turns out we're keeping her extremely busy. We've been developing virtual events like this, and we can't wait until the first master's cases start to arrive in the new year so that Jane will be doing those tastings. We already have over 1,600 people in the master's case, so it's marvelous. Founder's Choice is over 1,000, and so things are going well at Opimian, and we can only thank you, the members, for that. We really appreciate your support. We think it's marvelous how much people are becoming engaged in this virtual world that we're currently in, and you can count on us continuing with that and continuing to offer you both the stalwarts that you all enjoy, and then always bringing you new experience and new wines. And new things like the Riedel glasses, if I can put another plug in for that. Look at the gift shop. We do want, you know, member experience is so important to Greg and me as we transform Opimian to go into the next millennia. And it very much is about that member experience. It's not just about buying wines. It's a big part of what we do, but we also think that we want to make it an interesting way that you guys can connect with one another and with our producers, obviously with Jane and with our staff. So with that being said, thank you so very much for being here, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. And thank you to all the speakers, and cheers from Opimian. Cheers, everybody.